The old trail through the savannah was silent, but the old hunter felt the heavy air around him. He stood still, his body bent, hands gripping his worn spear firmly. The muted light of dusk bathed everything in gold, and the warm wind carried the dry scent of the earth. Then he saw her. A huge figure appeared at the edge of the trail, a woman twice his size, moving with a calm that seemed to defy the vastness around her. He swallowed his doubt, his heart pounding fast, almost suffocated. For months he waited, holding that promise with all his strength, repeating to himself that everything would be worth it the moment they reunited. But she wasn't the fragile shadow he had imagined. She was an intense presence, almost spectacular, larger than the savannah she filled. He didn't know if it was fear or surprise that gripped him first. His body, hardened by the hunts, trembled before that sight. The old hunter clung to a shred of hope, but a part of him wept silently. Moments like this carried everything he couldn't say. The old man, known among the nearby villages for his respect for the land, had eyes marked by having seen more than he could tell. He was no man without scars. The lines on his face told stories of losses and battles he preferred not to remember, but that lived inside him, whispering every night. He had lost more than he could count. Friends, family, and most of all, her, the woman who promised to return to him, a vow made before that painful farewell, almost erased by time. He would sit silently under the tree's shade, letting the world spin while his thoughts clung stubbornly to her. At that moment, his rough hands gripped the spear not against enemies, but against the weight of his own broken soul. He tried to hide the fear that maybe he was no longer enough, that the man she left behind was lost somewhere along the way. The inner conflict was as dense as the savannah after the rain. Outside, months and miles separated them. Each day that passed felt like a blow, increasing the silence between them. But inside him, a storm of feelings, wounded pride, deep regret, a nearly desperate desire to be accepted as he was, and a cruel fear of rejection. He wanted to be strong for her, but his strength was a mask barely holding the truth. He knew he was broken, and that the promise was the only thread still pulling him forward. He wanted to prove he was still worthy, but what he truly needed was an embrace. The old hunter stepped forward, his body heavy, never taking his eyes off her. Silence stretched between them, thick with meaning and untold secrets. The heat of the sun was fading, bringing a coolness that squeezed his chest tighter. She stopped at the trail's edge, immense and serene, holding a small black baby in her arms. That innocent gaze, a powerful contrast to the wild vastness of savannah. He swallowed the lump in his throat. What did this meeting mean? What was he willing to face? What did he need to leave behind? That moment was everything he had waited for, and nothing he had ever imagined. The old man took a deep breath, tasting the bitter silence that spoke louder than any words. Time seemed frozen in that instant. The wind brought the smell of dry leaves and the same earth he had walked beside her on happier days. He didn't know how to begin. He didn't want to seem weak, but he was already caught between pride and the simplest truth. He needed her, and what they had lost, what might still be found. The old hunter looked at her daughter, at that small symbol of the promise he wasn't sure he could still keep. The savannah felt small in the face of that enormous moment. And then he spoke almost in a whisper, almost to himself. I waited each day I thought I couldn't bear it. A savannah stretched wide under the fading light, the horizon a blur of gold and amber. The old hunter moved slowly through the tall grass, each step deliberate but weighed with uncertainty. He carried the burden of months alone, waiting for her return, waiting for the woman whose promise had rooted itself deep in his heart. Every morning, before the sun crowned the sky, he traced a path from his small hut to the edge of the trail. His eyes, sharp despite the wear of years, scanned the horizon for a sign, a shadow, a movement that could be her. His hands, weathered and scarred, tightened around his spear with the same hope that tightened his chest, the hope that she would come back. He was not the same man she had left. Age had bowed his shoulders and lined his face, but had not touched the loneliness that kept him awake at night. The silence of savannah echoed louder than any voice, and every rustle of the wind was a cruel reminder of the distance they'd been forced to endure. He remembered the day she left, the way the light had caught her eyes, full of resolve and fear tangled together. She was strong, resilient, and larger than life in his mind. But what he didn't grasp then was how much bigger she would become in his absence, not just in body, though she had grown full and round, a towering figure in a land of harsh beauty, but in spirit and meaning. At times, he blamed himself. If only he were braver, stronger, swifter on the chase. If only he had spoken when there was still time, instead of holding words behind a quiet, stubborn pride. But regret was a chain, and he wore it thick around his soul. Each day his thoughts wandered to the little one she carried with her, the baby, a symbol of their bond, a living thread connecting past and future. When he imagined the child's dark skin against the bright savanna, a pang of fear and wonder twisted in his belly. What kind of world awaited her? What kind of man was he truly? The old hunter's routine was set by the sun and the whispers of the grass, but his heart beat out of time. Sometimes he spoke aloud, words barely heard over the wind. I am still here. I am still waiting. Because hope, even fragile, was the only chain strong enough to hold him. The wind shifted, carrying a new scent, something familiar, powerful, and layered. He stopped, breathing deeply, the air thick with anticipation. Then there she was, stepping into the clearing, her shadow stretching long and wide across the dry earth. She carried herself with a slow grace that hid the battles fought along the way, her body larger than the memory he'd held on to, but her eyes still bright with the fire he knew. The baby rested in her arms, tiny and quiet, a soft contrast to her strong presence. No words were exchanged at first. The silence was its own conversation, heavier than any apology or embrace. He lowered his spear, hands trembling just enough to betray the calm he wore like armor. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the distance, the months, the pain seemed to close in a breath. He saw in her gaze a storm of emotions, love, doubt, fear, and a courage that he had underestimated. In that unspoken space, years of longing silence and unshed tears felt alive, raw, and achingly real. The old hunter swallowed hard. His voice came out rough, breaking the stillness. I waited for you. Every day I believed you'd come back. She nodded, the baby stirring in her arms as if sensing the gravity of the moment. And then, with no warning, she spoke, her voice steady, deep, full of the weight of their shared past and uncertain future. I'm here now. There was no grand reunion, no rush to fill the quiet with words or promises. Instead, the savanna held them, washed by the last light of day and the soft chorus of distant animals. The old hunter took a slow step forward, feeling the earth beneath him, the space between hope and reality shrinking. His heart ached with everything he hadn't dared voice aloud. The regret for lost time, the pride wounded by absence, the fierce love that no distance could erase. He glanced down at the baby, then back to her, at once a reminder of what they'd lost and the unexpected gift of what remained. The challenge ahead was immense. To rebuild from silence, to face wounds too old to ignore, and to find courage in the fragile promises of redemption. As night fell, the savanna whispered around them, a timeless witness to love, loss, and the quiet power waiting. The days that followed were filled with quiet rituals, each one a fragile attempt to bridge the yawning gap between past and present. The old hunter watched the woman move through the savanna, with the baby cradled gently against her, an image both powerful and tender that imprinted itself on his soul. He noticed the way she carried herself, larger than the men he hunted alongside, her presence undeniable, her laughter a rich, low sound that mingled with the wind. She was no longer the woman who left with trembling hope. She had grown into something fierce, something that seemed to hold the weight of the world with quiet pride. But beneath his reverence was a conflict that gnawed at him deeper than any wound the wild had ever inflicted. Pride battled with vulnerability. Hope wrestled with the sting of doubt. He was a man shaped by survival, by silence, by years of hardened solitude. And now, faced with the living proof of their shared past, the baby with eyes so dark they held storms, he wondered if he could ever be the man she needed. Each morning began with the same routine. The old hunter would light a small fire beneath the wide sky, the smoke curling up like a prayer to ancestors long gone. His fingers would trace the worn charm around his neck, a reminder of promises made and broken. The baby's soft coos were the only interruption to the vast silence, and the woman's careful movements spoke of strength forged in harsh truths. At times, he caught himself watching her more than the horizon, the way she stooped to pick a wild fruit, or how her eyes softened when she looked at their child. These moments were fragile shards of hope, light breaking through the clouded sky of his fears. He knew the road ahead wasn't just about them. It was about what their child would inherit, a legacy of courage, scars, and love imperfect but fiercely real. The conflict inside him twisted tighter with each passing day. He wanted to reach out and touch the life she carried, but old fears gripped him. Fear of rejection, of not measuring up, of the past shadow darkening every step forward. He remembered a time, long ago, when his hands were steady and his heart was lighter. Now, those hands trembled not from age, but from the uncertainty of love tested by time and distance. One evening, as the setting sun painted the sky in fiery hues, he spoke to her. His voice was rough, layered with years of silence. "I'm afraid," he admitted, lips barely moving. She looked at him then, not with anger or disappointment, but with something softer, acceptance mingled with her own fears. "We both carried that," she said softly, "but it's time to stop running from it." The old hunter's world, one so simple and defined by survival, was shifting beneath his feet. The savannah's wildness mirrored the storm inside him, a place where fear and courage tangled like the branches of acacia trees. He realized that waiting was no longer enough. If there was any hope for redemption, for love to live and grow beyond the wounds, it would take more than promises whisper on the wind. It would take courage to face everything they tried to escape. Their story was no longer about waiting, but about returning. To each other, to the land, and to a future neither dared to imagine alone. The savannah at dawn stretched vast and golden, each blade of grass glittering with dew like tiny stars fallen from the sky. The old hunter woke with the weight of the coming day pressing on his chest. He rose slowly, the ache in his joints a quiet reminder of time's passage. Beside him, the woman stirred, the baby nestled close, breathing softly in the early light. The air was cool, filled with the scent of earth and distant rain, the world still half asleep. For a long moment, they simply watched the horizon together, two figures united by a fragile thread of hope and unspoken words. He thought about the journey that brought them here, the promises made, the promises broken, and the silence that stretched between them like the vast land surrounding their small camp. The struggle inside the old hunter deepened with every shared glance and every silence between them. He carried the weight of his pride, the ghost of past mistakes, and a love both fierce and fragile. On this morning, the baby's laughter broke the quiet. The sound was pure, innocent, a light in the heavy shadows of regret. The woman smiled, a slow, radiant smile that softened even the hardest lines on the hunter's face. It was in these fleeting moments that he felt the thinnest, sharpest threads of connection, threads that tethered him to the past and pulled him toward a future both uncertain and hopeful. But even amid the fragile peace, the old hunter knew the scars were not justice to bear. The woman's eyes held stories of battles fought alone, of strength forged in isolation, of pain disguised behind a towering presence. She was more than the promise he waited for. She was a force of nature herself, larger than life, her courage echoing through the savannah with every step. And yet, beneath that strength lay her own fears. Fear that he might not understand, that the man she returned to was changed in ways too deep to heal. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the land, they sat close around the flickering fire. The baby slept between them, a quiet guardian of fragile hopes. The old hunter reached out, his hand trembling slightly as it found hers. His voice was low, rough from the desert-dry years. "I'm sorry for all the silence, for the time lost." She squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening. "We have time now," she whispered, "time to build what waited in the dark." In that moment, amidst the crackling fire and the vast silence of savannah, the walls between them began to crumble. It was not a sudden healing, but a step, slow and uncertain, towards forgiveness and hope. The old hunter knew the road ahead would be long and hard. The past could not be undone, but perhaps, just perhaps, love could be rewritten in the spaces between heartbeats. The savannah listened, holding their secrets and their promises, an eternal witness to the timeless dance of loss and redemption. The sun rose high over Savannah, casting long shadows and igniting the golden grasses with fire. The old hunter stood at the edge of a small river, the water cool and clear against his weathered hands. The baby giggled softly in her mother's arms, their laughter blending with the chorus of birds and the distant rumble of wildlife. The old hunter's heart ached with a new kind of hope, one born not just out waiting, but of witnessing life growing around him. He watched the woman move with effortless strength, the weight of her body not a burden but a powerful presence that filled the space between them with meaning. She was not the fragile figure he once imagined, but a force of nature, shaped by the harsh beauty of their world and the fierce love only survival could teach. The days unfolded slowly, punctuated by small acts of connection, shared meals under the acacia trees, quiet conversations as the sky blazed with sunset colors, and moments when their smiles reached deep into the shadows they carried. Yet, the deeper wounds still whispered beneath the surface. The old hunter felt the pull of his fears and regrets, the shadows of pride threatening to undo the fragile peace they had begun to build. He wondered if forgiveness was truly possible, not just from her, but from himself. One evening, as the stars scattered across the velvet sky, they sat by the fire, the baby sleeping peacefully between them. The woman spoke softly, her voice carrying the weight of years and the softness of new beginnings. "We are two halves of a broken promise," she said, "but together, perhaps we are whole again." Her words stirred something deep inside the old hunter, a blend of sorrow and strength, loss and renewal. He reached out, taking her hand in his, feeling the pulse of life and hope on the cool night air. The savanna around them held its breath as two souls, warm but unbroken, began to mend. Their journey was far from over, marked by challenges and healing, but in that moment, beneath the endless sky, they found a fragile peace. Love, he understood, was neither easy nor perfect. It was a long road of mistakes and courage, of letting go and holding on. And as a moon's silver light bathed their faces, the old hunter knew one truth. Sometimes, the greatest strength is found in choosing to stay, even when everything inside urges flight. The savanna was both beautiful and unforgiving, a land where every day was a battle and every moment a gift. The old hunter had learned that well, each sunset a reminder of time slipping through his fingers. But now, with her by his side and her child lying peaceful between them, the wildness felt less intimidating and more like a promise. He observed how her presence changed the rhythm of the land around them. Where once there was only silence or caution, now laughter and stories filled the air. Her shadow, long and proud, stretched across the earth like a mark of belonging, a testament to survival, strength, and love. Yet the past hung between them, heavy as the heat. Their talks were often halting, honest in their simplicity. Words, when spoken, were sometimes sharp and edged with unspoken pain. Often, they relied on a language of glance, breath, or touch, small gestures that conveyed volumes too big for their voices. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the savanna cooled, the old hunter finally voiced a fear that had shadowed him for so long. What if the past never truly fades? What if the wounds we carry never heal? She looked at him, her eyes steady and soft. Then we learn to live with them, and we find new reasons to keep going. The baby's innocent laughter was a balm to their rough edges, a reminder that life creates beauty even in the most fractured places. The old hunter spent hours watching them, the woman's gentle way of guiding her child's hands, the baby's curious eyes reflecting the wide, open sky. It was in these moments that he felt something shift, a fragile hope that the promise of the past could lead to a future, no matter how fragile. The tension between what was lost and what could be was always present, but it no longer imprisoned him. Instead, it became a warning and a teacher. The hunter knew the path was not simple or clear, but he was willing to take it, step by step, breath by breath. One night, as they sat beneath the stars, he squeezed her hand and whispered, "I don't know where this road leads, but I'm ready to walk it with you." She smiled, a soft, tired smile filled with acceptance and strength. Then we walked together. And so, beneath the endless sky of savannah, two broken souls began to weave their lives anew, a tapestry rich with pain, love, and the promise of redemption. The savannah was alive with the quiet sounds of night, cicadas, distant cries of wild beasts, and the soft rustling of grass in the cool breeze. The old hunter sat alone by the dying embers of the fire, his thoughts swirling like the smoke into the vast, dark sky. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, about the woman he loved and the child they shared. Her strength had surprised him, a wall he had to learn to lean against, not break through. She was a force one could neither deny nor ignore, much like the land itself, wild and commanding. He breathed deeply, tasting the dry air, the scent of earth and life mingling. The old hunter's mind wandered through memories, moments of tenderness and rage, hope and despair. He remembered how the promise they made felt sacred once, a bond unbreakable, yet now stretched and frayed by time and silence. But silence, he learned, was a language of its own, heavier and louder than any word spoken. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn charm. It was their promise, held tight in his palm, a weight both comforting and unbearable. A sudden sound made him look up, the soft footsteps of someone approaching. She stood there, larger than before, her presence filling the space between them with an unspoken challenge. Her eyes held a question and a plea, the unsteady hope of someone willing to try again, but afraid to fail. He looked at her, then at the baby wrapped safely in her arms. The child's wide eyes peered out, reflecting the firelight and something deeper, the pulse of a new beginning. For a long moment, they simply stood, the night wrapping around them like a cloak, binding their shared past and uncertain future. The old hunter finally spoke, his voice breaking the silence. "We can't undo the past, but maybe we can still find a way to walk forward." She nodded slowly, a tear tracing a slow line down her cheek. "Together," she whispered, and beneath the vast African sky, they began to rewrite their story, one breath, one step, one fragile promise at a time. The savannah stretched endlessly beneath the midday sun, its golden grasses bending gently in the warm breeze. The old hunter and the woman walked side by side along the well-worn trail, the baby's soft cries carried by the wind. The land around them was vast and full of life. Every rustle, every distant call reminded the fierce beauty they lived within. He glanced at her, marveling at how she moved with a quiet power that seemed to expand the space around them. She was no longer just a woman who had left. She had grown, fuller, stronger, larger than life itself. And in her arms, their child was a symbol of a promise still alive, fragile but pulsing with possibility. The old hunter's heart was heavy, a mix of pride and caution. He knew the path before them was littered with obstacles, memories that cut deep, wounds that might never fully heal. But his desire to protect this new family outweighed the fear that had once paralyzed him. Sometimes he caught himself hesitating, haunted by ghosts of words left unsaid and moments lost to silence. Yet, every time he looked at her, at the baby nestled close, hope stirred within him again. They stopped beneath the sprawling branches of a lone acacia tree, shaded from the harsh sun. The old hunter knelt beside the child, his rough hands tracing the soft curve of a tiny cheek. The baby's dark eyes met his, wide and unafraid, as if understanding the promise held in those hands. The woman watched quietly, her presence strong but tender. "You carry the future," he said softly to the child, voice heavy with emotion, "and I will do everything to protect it." Her smile was a balm, touching his soul with fragile forgiveness and new beginnings. The savannah seemed to hum around them, a timeless witness to the delicate dance of love, hope, and courage. They were a family bound by imperfection and resilience, ready to face what the wild world had yet to throw their way. And as the wind carried their laughter to the tall grasses, the old hunter finally understood. Some promises do not break. They change form, grow deeper, and teach us what it really means to forgive and to love. The night sky over Savannah was vast and full of stars, each one like a silent witness to the lives unfolding beneath their light. The old hunter sat by the fire, the warmth a small comfort against cool night air. The woman rested nearby, the baby sleeping peacefully between them, her steady breathing a reminder of hope's fragile presence. He reflected on the journey they had taken, one marked by waiting, pain, and a growing understanding that love was not always about grand gestures, but about quiet persistence. In the stillness, he realized how much they had both changed. The distance and time had carved new shapes in their hearts, but it also built bridges, newer, stronger connections born from honesty and acceptance. The old hunter's eyes softened as he looked at her, seeing beyond the surface to the wild spirit that had always been unyielding and true. "I don't know what the future holds," he said softly, voice barely louder than the wind. "But I know I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." She smiled, reaching for his hand. That's all I ever needed. Their story was far from over. The scars they carried would remain, but beneath the weight of past regrets, new love was blossoming, cautious, real, and powerful. The savanna around them seemed to breathe with this promise, the night alive with possibility, and a quiet courage to keep moving forward together. The morning light filtered through the Amendoera leaves, casting golden patterns on the ground. The old hunter, now calmer, watched the woman and the child with silence full of unspoken promises. The air carried the scent of wet grass, the promise of new hope. He knew the past was still a shadow, but he also understood that the love sprouting there was greater, more resilient than any old wound. The fidelity of a smile, the look of strength and vulnerability, were new seeds now planted in his tired heart. The child stirred, her small smile lighting her mother's face. The hunter felt a pang of pride mixed with quiet fear of losing what he had fought so hard to regain. Each morning there was a small miracle, a chance to begin again, a thread of hope that grew stronger with the very silence around them. He turned his gaze to the clear sky, realizing that despite all the scars, life never stopped surprising him. His greatest battle now was learning to trust again, himself, them, the love that seemed timid but had enough strength to bloom. He stepped forward with a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility flowing through the landscape. By now, time no longer meant the same. Every second was a victory, an act of courage. And there, beneath the infinite sky, he decided he would no longer run. "I want to try," he whispered to the wind, "to leave the past behind and build something real." She looked at him tenderly, her eyes shining with renewed hope. "Then let's," she said simply, "together." And on that quiet morning, the savanna bore witness to beginning a new journey, of forgiveness, strength, and a love reborn from the ashes of what was once broken. Because after all, life is that, an eternal promise to begin again,